So today on the podcast, I am thrilled to welcome Dave Birss. Dave's a real powerhouse when it comes to the world of both creativity and AI. I think he's created more LinkedIn learning courses than anybody else I know, and they're super useful to help make these big ideas of creativity and AI easy to understand and actually useful. Dave's also a really experienced keynote speaker and a workshop host. He's spoken all around the world, and if you've ever joined one of his virtual trainings online, you'll know he brings that same energy and engagement. People always leave with new tools and a new sense of inspiration. So I'm really excited to dive into his journey of being a public speaker to see what we can learn. Let's get started. Dave, welcome. It's so good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very flattered to be asked. Having seen the guests that you've previously had on, I feel like an absolute charlatan.
No, not at all. I was, doing some stalking, and wow, like you've had this fascinating career that kind of spans everything from theatre, I even think, agencies, TV, radio. You're a book author. You've done a TEDx talk. The list is long. So I think there's a lot there for people to learn from.
I don't know if you'd call it a career as much as corporate attention deficit disorder. You know, I think that's what I just sort of get bored of one thing and move to the next thing.
Yeah.
Oh, squirrel. Yeah.
Yeah. That rings a few bells with me as well. Yeah. So I want to take you back in time, because what I love doing on these interviews is really going back and looking at, where did you first start to have this idea of, okay, I need to stand up and talk in front of people, and where was that? What was it like? Where did it start?
It certainly wasn't at school. A lot of it was accidental. And my whole life, the direction it's taken is from accidents happening and me just going, oh, all right, then that's an open door. I'll walk through that one. So I was a musician in my late teens and early 20s, and I was playing for a BBC theatre show. So it was a BBC comedy show that was on the road, and I was a musician in the band that was touring with them. And one night I was getting drunk with the writers of the show. Yeah, and their judgment was impaired because they'd been drinking, and they said, because I've been making up silly songs, on my guitar, and they sort of said, do you want to close the show with half an hour of stand-up next week? And I was drunk, my judgment was impaired, and I said yes. And I woke up the next morning with a hangover and this awful realization that I had 6 days to write half an hour of stand-up, and I somehow managed to do it. And I'd never ever wanted to be a stand-up, but here was me suddenly. My first gig was to a packed theatre of 3,500 people.
Wow! Like, if there's ever a dictionary definition of jumping into the deep end.
So that was it. So I ended up doing stand-up with the BBC for the rest of that tour, and at the end of the tour, they offered me. They got commissioned for the TV series again, and they offered me a part in the TV series every week. And in the same week, I got offered a job in advertising. Yeah. And I decided to go for advertising because I'd never intended to be a comedian. And I thought that maybe doing advertising was being a sit-down comedian that would be slightly higher paid. Ended up doing advertising for 20 years. And from that, I'd have to do client presentations as a creative in ad agencies. But I don't think I was particularly good at it. And I winged it, a lot of the time. Yeah. And that didn't always work. Yeah. But towards the end of my career, I got very into teaching, because being a creative director and having people in a department, I got very into sort of teaching and trying to pass on knowledge. And that's really where the speaking started to come in. And I set up an education division within the agency. And it was one of the biggest ones in London. I set up this education division, and every 2 weeks I would do a lecture about a different thing that I wanted people to learn. And I would be terrified. I'd spend pretty much the whole 2 weeks, all my evenings, collating all the information together, totally over preparing. And then the night before, I would barely sleep because I would be going through it again and again in front of a mirror, wanting to make sure that I didn't screw up in front of my colleagues. Before I did it, I would be shaking. My voice would be like, this is when I'd be talking. And I think it was I was terrified. And to be honest, I then started to be asked to speak at things, and I would be terrified every single time. And I've got to say that now, as somebody who, you know, a large part of my income comes from public speaking, I still am nervous every single time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I embrace it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that really changed it for me along a similar journey, was understanding that it's biology. We're all the same. Like, everybody gets nerves because the physical things of our nerves is actually an emotion, fear. Emotions are physical, and I think that's an important message for people, that there's nobody that just decides one day, hey, I'm going to get up on a stage and I won't feel any nerves whatsoever. Like, just doesn't happen at all. But so okay, I want to we'll come back to this and the teaching and doing the speaking, but I want to just drag us back to that stand-up comedy experience, because I think, yeah, in the distant sands of time. But can you imagine, like, because it's interesting, when I was looking at a lot of your videos and even your TEDx talk, like, humor is a big part of it. So was that like the beginning of bringing humor into things that you do, or that was already something innate in you that you just decided, that's why I'm going to suddenly do this stand-up comedy show?
Yeah, well, I guess as a kid, I'd always been very irreverent. You know, I'd never been one for trying to sort of toe the line. I'd always got this sort of bastard streak in me, which is I want to do the opposite. I want to challenge that. I want to do something different. And I think that's been a thread through my life. And I think that actually when you're doing public speaking, it's not difficult to stand out in a conference.
Yeah.
You know, most speakers are doing sort of very similar things. And particularly if you're a corporate event and it's round about, okay, this is the National Institute of Accountants event, then you're going to get people up on stage who are going, giving case studies. Okay, I'll just got to take you through this. I've got a few slides here to show you how we prepared the accounts for Megacorp. And you know, and it's not difficult to stand out when everyone is doing that kind of stuff. And that's really been my attitude. And I suppose when I was doing stand-up, there's stuff that I learned from that I then started to realize I was using in public speaking and when I was doing presentations. And one of the things is I called it plate spinning. So when you look at the audience, one of the things you're trying to do as a comedian is just get a few laughs from somebody. You need to make a connection. So you look around the room and you're trying to make eye contact with someone, get a connection, get them laughing. And that becomes infectious within that little group there. And at that point, you've got a connection, you've got some laughs happening. Okay, that plate's spinning. I need to go to another part of the room. And okay, I need to try and find other people that I can sort of start to warm up, get some smiles, get some nods, get that connection going. Okay, I've got 2 plates spinning now. I need to go back and get that plate going again. And then so you're trying to get as many plates spinning as possible. And when I was presenting creative work to clients, that then meant that what I was doing is I'm looking at the clients and trying to get a connection, trying to get a smile, trying to get them nodding.
Yeah.
And then I'd go into a different person at the table to try and do the same. And that plate spinning thing carried with me. And it's something that I still do when I'm doing public speaking. If I can see the audience, and it's harder to do when you've got a really large audience. Like last week, I was speaking in Riga to an audience of hundreds, you know, or about 1,000 folk in the room, and you know, and the lights are on the stage, so you can't see the audience that much. Exactly. It's more difficult to do it, but if you've got a smaller group, I still do this sort of plate spinning thing.
Yeah, I love the metaphor of spinning the plates. I've never thought about it that way before, and it's something that will be stuck in my brain now. So,
but there's things that I learned from being a musician as well.
Yeah.
So that being a musician, I was trying to make connections as well. So, you know, if I was playing for bands, I would do things quite theatrical sometimes. Because I would be like a session player, I was a hired musician for different bands. And some of the stuff that I did, I built my own instruments, and they'd just be ridiculous pieces of theatre. I had one that had two big truck aerials, and they went into a compressor, and all it did was went, you know, it was the same as holding a guitar lead and getting the buzz off a guitar lead, but then sort of amplified and distorted and stuff. But all I did was I just had to connect these two aerials that were coming out, and that to me was about not just about playing music, but making people smile. Yeah. Because I wanted it to be an experience. And this, trying to make things experiential, again, is something that I tried to do. And that then became a big thing when online happened, because I found that, you know, most of the stuff I was attending these virtual conferences in 2020, and it was awful. You know, people were just so bad, and they would share their screen and then end up as a postage stamp in the corner, and there'd be this crappy PowerPoint slide that's taken over the screen, and you just, oh man, you just drift off. And it's like, what can I do that's different?
Yeah.
So I had to develop a way again of trying to make it an experience even when you're online.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's, you know, and you see that whilst there is a big overlap between speaking in a room and speaking virtually, there are different things that you need to take into account. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, you've had so many amazing, like, variety of experience, from stand-up comedy, stage, you know, musician, TV, stuff like that. And when I think about something like confidence, and I imagine somebody listening to this going, well, I don't feel very confident and I kind of need that. Like, what was some of the journey for you in terms of how you built confidence? Because when I mean, you talk a lot about obviously creativity and ideas, and I think you need confidence for creativity as well. There's an element of that in it. So has there been any like common threads, or what was that journey like in terms of building confidence over time?
Yeah, well, let me tell you about my journey onto radio. I remember the first time I was interviewed on radio. I was a busker, and when I was at university, I would go out between lectures and I would play slide guitar blues on the streets of Glasgow. And I remember a radio interviewer coming up and sitting beside me, can I interview you? And it was being recorded, but all I could think about was like the entire population of Scotland listening to this and thinking, this guy's an asshole, you know. And I again, my voice, and then there was another time I was on with a band I was playing with. We were on Radio Scotland for the Edinburgh Festival. So and they asked us to go in and play live, and we went in and I fluffed up all of my guitar parts because my hands were shaking so much. So I was absolutely terrified of radio. Just the whole thought of broadcast, it terrified me.
Yeah.
So there's two ways to deal with that. One is to make sure you're never, ever on radio or television again in your life, or you're going to tackle it head on and go, I'm not going to let this beat me. Yeah. And I went for the second option. Yeah. And I started to put myself forward for things until I completely beat this, and until I ended up loving radio. And at one point, I was the co-host of a breakfast show in Cambridgeshire, and I would write poems live on air. You know, I'd have like the 3 minutes of a record. Somebody had given me 4 words, really difficult words. Write me a poem about this, and I'd have the 3 minutes of a record to write a poem to then give to them afterwards. And yeah, so I really, with that, I was totally putting myself at that point where if it's risky, everything you're doing is risky, you could fail. And I was putting myself at that point and I've ended up in many ways almost being an adrenaline junkie that way, where I'll take myself to the edge of where I'm confident, into that part where I might screw this up. And sometimes I do. Yeah. And then I go off stage and I kick myself and go, oh, why did you do that? But I kind of have this adrenaline junkie approach, I guess, to public speaking.
Yeah, and it's a bit like I've heard it described before as this, which I do as well. Like sometimes you just have to say yes before you're ready and then
Yeah,
prepare like a badass. Like you just have
yeah,
to do the work. So,
yeah.
like, as you have obviously experienced over the years, that the more you do any kind of public speaking in whatever format, that builds confidence over time. It's like any fear. The more you do it, the more you get used to it. But have there been any other things, especially maybe in the early days? Are there any other things that like helped you cross over that fear of like, oh my God, I feel nervous, but I'm just going to do it anyway? Like,
Well,
what?
certainly over preparing, and I still do over prepare.
Yeah.
I did two sessions yesterday, and I totally over prepared for them, you know. But I that to me is how I feel more confident. I still feel anxious. I get anxiety. I'm actually as much as you might think that I'm an extrovert. I suffer from social anxiety. So I put me in a room of people I don't know, and I tend to like wilt into the corner. So I'm not somebody who's like the life and soul of a party. I'm not that gregarious person, even though people see me on stage and imagine that I must be.
Yeah.
But it's not like that. As someone who's more introverted, I still, that doesn't affect me being on stage. Stage is a totally different place where it's my environment. I'm in control, and I make sure that I've got the information. And the way that when I've sort of mentored people about speaking, is make sure that you know everything you talk about, and then one level beyond. You know, but in case at the end somebody asks you a question.
Yeah.
So I go to that level where I need to know lots of stuff. So that and I put facts and figures in my head, and I memorize a load of things, and I use like memory techniques like mnemonics to be able to remember vast amounts of information.
Yeah.
And with this sort of combination of wit and having fun and breaking the rules, along with statistics and total nerdery of information, I think that those two things together have ended up being like that's the way I present, that's the way I do things. But I mean, it's not about, I don't feel that confident generally. To me, lack of confidence is a knowledge gap, and I need to fill that gap with as much information as I can to give myself enough confidence to be able to present.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. You mentioned being like introverted and things like that. And it's something I hear many times from people who are introverts, and they go, I'm an introvert. I can't do public speaking. And I
Yeah.
always say, like, I have worked really in the last 10 years during my time at Prezi, I worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of speakers. And I would say the majority are introverted. There is something, and it's exactly what you said. Introverts tend to be amazing planners. They like to make sure that they do the work, that they practice, that they get all the information in. So it's definitely a reoccurring
Yeah.
theme that many introverts are great speakers, even though there is the stress, but we all have the stress. But actually, I think in terms of pre-planning, I think introverts like almost like take it to a higher degree in a way.
Yeah, there's from people that I've sort of mentored in public speaking, there's something that I've noticed between introverts and extroverts. And this is a general rule. It's not, you know, it's not like blanket for everyone.
Sure.
But as a sort of general rule, introverts are focused on giving as much value to the audience as possible. Extroverts are trying to get value from the audience to feed themselves. Because extroverts are on stage, the extroverts that I've dealt with, they've had this thing where they're just all about trying to make the audience laugh rather than trying to give the audience as much value as possible. And that, to me, is a difference, that what direction is the value going in? And for me, it always has to be going out towards the audience, giving them as much as possible. So they come away going, I can change my behavior, or I know something I didn't know before, or I feel differently about that. You want to transform your audience from wherever they are at the beginning to where you want them to be at the end. And that's your job. And if you're not doing that, I don't think you're really being a public speaker.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was talking about this yesterday, this idea of, are you there to serve or are you there to sell? And I
Mm,
think that that's, I always remember that the presentation has the word present in it. You're giving a present
that's
to the
nice.
audience. Like,
Yeah.
always, I think like, yeah, how are you helping them do something better next week or change how they think
Mm.
about something? So yeah, I love that. Really
Yeah,
nice.
it's also got the word resent in it. Um,
Make of that what you will.
I don't know what that lesson is.
So, like, one of the things that I'm talking a lot about at the moment is this idea of the amount of different benefits that being a good speaker brings you.
Yeah.
So, you've obviously done a lot of different things over the years. Like, how have you seen the ability to do some form of public speaking? How has that benefited you, your life, your career? Like, can you speak to some of that?
Oh, definitely. So many things. So many things. So when I did a TV series 10 years ago, and I wrote, directed, and presented it, and I wrote the theme tune. So it that would never have come around if I hadn't got more comfortable doing public speaking.
Yeah.
Some of the places that I've been invited to go to, it's just extraordinary. I've been at events where they're just experiences that are life changing. I have met people that are really close friends now when out on the road, and it's just so much. If it wasn't for public speaking, I wouldn't be writing books as well. There's and from that, then doing my LinkedIn learning courses. So all of that, it started this journey for me that is where I am now, that basically what I'm about is knowledge dissemination. So I try to go out in front of where people are, learn something that people don't know about yet, and then bring that back to share that information.
Yeah.
So that is really what my role is. And whether I do that through public speaking, through writing books, through broadcast, through my training courses, it's all the same. I go out and find the information and then I come back and share it.
Yeah.
And that was the journey that public speaking took me on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the idea of it's almost like a little snowball that you push off the top of a hill and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger the further down the
Yeah.
mountain it goes. It's
Yeah. I don't know what I'd be doing if I hadn't, if public speaking hadn't taken off, because it has directed everything I do now. I
yeah.
wouldn't be here if it wasn't for it.
Yeah. Definitely. So I want to give you a chance in a minute to let people know where they can find out more about you and where they can get hold of your books, definitely. But before we do that, like, have you got like one piece of advice that you would give to people listening who are thinking, I would really love to try public speaking, but I'm scared?
Yeah, I would actually say put yourself out there. Probably the first 50 talks I did weren't that great, but then people started to come to me to ask if I would do stuff. And then shortly after that, people offered me money. So it's this sort of journey. To me, there was 3 stages of it. One was putting yourself out there and not being that great, but trying to be great. Then there is the being invited, and then there's being invited and paid.
Yeah.
And at some points in my career, public speaking was more than 50% of my income.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, you have to put yourself out there, and the more you do it, the better you get. But I guess another piece of advice for me, and this is actually to public speakers as well, is don't neglect online the possibilities, the opportunities you have. Like I've created like ways of presenting online that are very immersive. So I'm sort of seeing here if I can sort of show you that I can bring graphics in, and then I will talk about the graphics weatherman style, and to bring in these graphics and do this kind of stuff that, it just uses, I'm using Keynote, which is equivalent of PowerPoint on a Mac.
Yeah.
And I just overlay that on top of my video using OBS on here. It's not a difficult thing to do, but with a bit of imagination, you can create experiences that, you can have fun with. Listen up. But you can have, you can create something that online is an experience.
Yeah.
And like I've got, it's a little bit like flight control of NASA here, where I've got computer here, got a computer there. I've got another screen here, which is where when I'm doing like a Zoom talk, I'll have the mosaic of faces and I'll have the chat over here. And then I've got my teleprompter here with a broadcast camera behind it. And then I've got my lights. But I then use this whole thing where I can see the audience here. I ask them to keep their cameras on, and it means I can wave to them and get them to wave back and give me reactions and things. I can see the chat, and what I do is I create a dialogue. And through doing that, during the pandemic and building this kind of setup, it changed the way that I actually deliver in-person presentations now, because I had focused so much on interaction that now my talks live are far more interactive. And I get the audiences involved so that I've got them leaning forward rather than sitting back. And that, to me, is a piece of advice for anyone who's doing public speaking, is try to get people leaning forward, not leaning back. So at least once every 10 minutes, I'm trying to get them involved somehow.
Exactly. Yeah, fantastic advice. And I guess you're using something like an Elgato Stream Deck as well.
Yes, I've got my Stream Deck here, indeed.
Great. So how can people find out more about you? Where can they go to see your stuff, buy your books? There we go.
Well, I've got, first of all, I'm very Googleable. There are about 5 Dave Birsses in the world. We all got in contact with each other a few years ago. And I won the internet. So davebirss.com. is where you'll find me, which, there. But the issue is that it's a very difficult name to spell, it seems. And BIRSS, if you're a police officer, it's Bravo, India, Romeo, Sierra, Sierra. It's that guy again. That's how you spell my name. If you spell it wrong, you could be in trouble. I can't guarantee what you'll get in your search results.
Fantastic. So all that remains is to say thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your experience. I think there's a lot of goodness and gems in there for people to take away. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Spencer. And for anyone who's made it to the end of this, thank you. I appreciate it.